All right, good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022. Hope everyone's doing well. We're gathered here with the Athens-Clarke County Commission, myself, Mayor Kelly Gertz, and we are here primarily for our monthly agenda setting session, and I'm going to ask Clerk Spratlin to call roll so she can gather that for the minutes.
Davenport.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Link.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Benson.
Here.
Poole.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Thornton.
Here.
Hamby. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, we're going to begin tonight with an item on which we need to take no action tonight, but we need to make sure commissioners and the public are informed. We, of course, have a partnership with the Athens Housing Authority for the North Downtown project that's well underway right now. And as with all capital or construction projects, cost issues are coming to bear. It's true with every public sector project and every private sector project that I've seen over the last number of months. And so we have with us Rick Parker and Charlie Gladenis from the Athens Housing Authority, and they're just going to take us through a high-level series of slides regarding the North Downtown project and some of the cost considerations attached to that. And then what I'm going to ask staff to do, kind of following that, is to work with the Housing Authority to give us some options coming out of the information that you're about to see. So, Rick, come on up to the podium. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I want to start with a little bit of history. We have already experienced a number of significant shortfalls over the last couple of years. When COVID originally hit and businesses turned down, construction went up, we originally faced a gap of about $6.5 million in the summer of 2021. We managed to plug that gap with a variety of techniques, including our development team was able to obtain an additional amount of tax credits towards this project at some considerable detriment to our developers because they had to give up an entire project in the state of Georgia in order to prioritize this project and obtain the additional credits. This resulted in about another $6 million worth of additional equity for the North Downtown Athens project. We also contributed a $500,000 in deferred developer fee. So we had resolved, as of Q4 of last year, we had resolved the shortfall, and the project was aligned for closing either in Q1 or Q2 of this year. We really thought we'd be closing no later than June of this year. As things went on, however, the closing got moved back a little, and we repriced recently and got the same sort of shock that I think lots of people in the construction industry are finding. So on late March of 2022, we did another pricing to developers, contractors rather, and discovered that there was now an $11.1 million financing shortfall. This was the construction bids that we got were literally 35% higher than the anticipated construction pricing previously budgeted in 2021. The numbers went from $209,000 a unit to $282,000 a unit. That's an $8.7 million of additional cost just on constructing. At the same time, in this perfect storm that we're experiencing in our country right now, interest rates are rising, and we went from a 4.48% to 5.22%, and that reduced our loan proceeds that we were able to borrow based on the financials of the property, another $1.1 million. And then similarly, other costs, additional engineering, architecture, third-party reports created another gap of about $1.3 million, and that's how you get to the 11.1. So this was quite a shock to our system, but it's not unprecedented. We immediately went out and we started taking a look at, okay, are these numbers realistic? What's going on? We started tearing apart the bid numbers and looking at the construction industry. And I just want to share with you some data that I think may be helpful to show you what's going on out there in the real world. Framing and metal studs have experienced a 200% increase since the beginning of 2021. So all the metal studs in this these buildings are going up by 200%. Same thing on cold rolled steel materials used in making ductwork, up 145. Mechanical equipment is up 30%. Piping is up 50%. Windows, aluminum pricing is up 75% just since the beginning of last year. Just this last month, aluminum pricing went up 22% in 1 month, to give you an idea of what went on during the month of March. Steel is up significantly. There's not a lot of structural steel in this planned construction, but there is rebar and other steel in the job that went up significantly as well. Just transporting things from overseas. 2 years ago, prior to COVID, it was about $3,500 for each shipping container. Then we just used China as an example because so much of the world's materials do come from China. Was about $3,500. This at one point was over $30,000 for each shipping container coming over. And this affects finished trades and other things that are being shipped over. Roofing, for example, is 5% a month, and roofing contractors are saying they will not guarantee prices, just expect 5% a month until you're done, and they can't even guarantee a shipping date. So these are the issues that we're facing. It's pretty much unprecedented. I don't think any of us have seen anything like this in the construction industry, or for that matter, in terms of inflation in the last 40 years or so. So we wanted to be transparent. We got together once we had verified these numbers, thought about things, made sure that these numbers were not just being driven by a contractor's estimates. We sat down with staff and the mayor's office, made sure everybody was aware on leadership, and felt like we needed to make sure that the commission was aware of the challenges that we are now facing. So, this is my last slide. I promise not to take up too much time this evening. As a result of these, the project has a large financing gap that can only be solved with innovative solutions and with a lot of cooperation and work from everybody on all sides of this deal. That will include local government. We are currently exploring a variety of solutions to ensure that this project gets financed and starts construction this year. Everybody is deeply committed to this. We think there is a path through this. We are vetting some of those solutions now. We're not ready and prepared to discuss those. We don't want to present something that turns out to have a technical problem or glitch or won't work the way we thought it will. We don't. When we bring you solutions, we want to make sure that you have the range and options of solutions that can conceivably work. And what you see there at the bottom of that slide is the architect's rendering of what the current plans actually look like. So this isn't just a pie in the sky drawing of what this project would look like. This is looking from Strong Street, is it, Charlie?
Madison or Lumpkin.
Madison, rather. This is looking from about Madison and Lumpkin, on Madison Street, looking at the north, facing north, looking at the elevation main entrance into what is currently planned and strategized for this property. We believe it can be done, but we need to be transparent and let you know there are some unprecedented challenges. We're working on those challenges, and we look forward to getting back to you in the very near future with concrete recommendations and suggestions as to how we can make this still work and happen. Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you and let you.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate that. And as Rick mentioned, you know, we're really not at solution mode yet at this point, but I definitely wanted to, you know, make sure that this was in front of the commission and the public, you know, just knowing the environment we're in, and see if you had any kind of high-level questions about sort of where we are. Mike?
Mine's just, Rick, what I'm hearing you say is that you need about $6.5 million to fill the financial gap. Is that right?
Well, that ballpark would probably start to get us there. We've got strategies to plug part of that 11 million already.
Oh, 11.
But there's an 11.1 million, go back to,
Okay,
go
I'm
back to
sorry.
that slide, because of the
I got
factors,
you.
the interest rates and the construction costs skyrocketing right now. But we've got part of that gap, we think, already plugged, and we're working on the rest of that gap.
Okay.
It may be closer to about 7.1 million by the time, right now, but that fluctuates depending on what we're looking at. So we want to come back to you when we have everything penciled out, we have all of our options and choices and possible solutions and strategies. We'll bring that back to you then.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see that top
Sorry
line.
about that.
So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah, it's it's a, like I said, an unprecedented challenge.
Tim?
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for being here with us, Rick. Just a clarifying question then. So on this, with the 11.1, is this taking into account the assumed 5% month increase that is on the other slide, or?
Yeah, it's taking the pricing
Okay.
that our contractor, we bid the project.
Right.
So, and that doesn't mean we won't rebid the project, but when you do that, then you go back and you add time, and time is not our friend right
Sure.
now. Interest rates are not gonna turn around and go down. Prices may moderate, but they may not.
Right.
So, but we went back and took a look, they took into account all the sorts of things that you saw on
Okay.
that slide. That next slide that showed you costs that are increasing
Right.
out there were examples of the kinds of things that the contractor had to take into account
Okay.
when they were adjusting their price for the current position that we're in right now in the market.
Okay, appreciate it.
And so that's just examples, not
Right.
specific.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jesse?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. If you could send this along to us, that'd be great to have. as
Sure,
a
I will
reference
leave,
to-
I will leave this stick. It's on a USB stick right now. I will leave that with Blaine, and he can make sure that he gets it to each of you. It's small enough that it can be transmitted by email. Sometimes you get a lot of photographs and PowerPoints, and they won't go out over email, but he should be able to email this to you, and Blaine, when I
Excellent.
finish, I'll take it out and give it to you tonight.
Thank you.
My question is, I mean, if part of how this gap is made up is through a contribution from ACCUG, then how does that change the nature of our agreement? When, to date, we've been only involved in things that are in the land and on the ground, and if this is building costs, where does that leave us in terms of our contract between this entity and the other entities involved in the construction?
I think at the point in time that we bring you solutions, we'll bring you the answers to those questions as well.
Okay.
And I think just the short answer to that, Commissioner, is that our contractual relationship it lies with the Housing Authority.
Right.
And then they have a subsequent, so we would be looking to focus on partnership with the Housing Authority for that.
That's correct.
All right, well, Rick, we really appreciate it. Thanks for just keeping us updated and look forward to the next phase of the conversation.
Thank you, folks. We will be back in touch with you, and we appreciate it. We try to be as transparent on this stuff as we can, and we got to staff as soon as we vetted these numbers, and then after conversations with staff, they suggested that we give you a high-level overview at this point as early as possible as well. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Let me give this to you before I forget.
Sure. Thank you. All right, I am going to relocate.
This and shut down this.
I had one other very brief thing to enter into the record before we begin with the agenda setting session. And it just is making explicit what I referenced in conversation at the voting meeting, which is coming work of the Inclusionary Zoning Task Force. So every member of the task force is asked to continue with that work. And so what I'm going to formally do is ask them to continue that great work by using the combination of the emerging missing middle scan and the original 100-page Planning Commission report to look at opportunities for a wider array of by right housing types, including duplexes, triplexes, auxiliary dwelling units, cottage courts, tiny home clusters, and similar models. And then following that, to consider any density bonuses or other incentives that would be offered in single-family zones, likely in conjunction with some other necessary code modifications that would be necessary if more units were to be introduced into RS zones. So I'll send that to staff and to the clerk, so she has that. It's already been sent to the Inclusionary Zoning Task Force. All right, well, tonight, as is always the case, we have several opportunities for public input. We'll have an opportunity on the consent agenda, and then we will have an opportunity for public input on old new business, which includes the planning and zoning items. And that public input will take the form of up to 3 minutes per individual. That allows for the lights to turn green when somebody begins talking, yellow when they have 30 seconds remaining, and red when that 3 minutes has expired. I did want to check first with members of the commission. Is there any item that Commissioner would like to remove from the consent agenda? All right, we're already winning. All right, so would anybody in the audience tonight like to speak to any of those items on the consent agenda? And those are items 1 through 5. Items 1 through 5. All right, seeing none, we're going to move on to old and new business again, including those items that are planning and zoning items as recommended by the Planning Commission. Would anybody like to speak to old or new business? All right, we're going to move on to first item of old business. And that is sort of another element of the North Downtown project, which is the payment in lieu of taxes agreement with the Athens Housing Authority. So does anybody have a question about that? All right, moving on to 7. 7 is the FY23 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan. And as noted in the agenda, a public hearing is tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. And of course, we just saw these items in our work session. Commissioner Parker.
I wanted to follow up with staff about the question raised regarding the youth development summer funding and some of the organizations that may have also applied for funding here, if we had yet kind of decided how to move forward with that. Those tensions and folks perhaps having applied for both streams of funding.
Well, we were going to note that certainly during the award process in the contracts, but to be very clear, I don't think that we've done an addendum that included that, did we?
We have not.
Yeah. And it's due this Friday. So we would be clear before, and so folks could not, once I think they identify the preferred ones and we come to y'all, we would be very explicit about what those lines were.
Okay, so you're working with, Manager Jones, if you had something.
The funding can be layered, but not duplicated, meaning you couldn't serve the same person twice, but you could layer funding on top of each other. You could use CDBG and ARPA for the same activity, but Nikki Jones couldn't be served twice with different funding sources.
So a distinction from the last conversation is that programmatically, your nonprofit could use it for the same activity. Just to be very careful that the same person didn't receive benefits twice from it.
So just to clarify, so because this kind of runs counter to my understanding from last meeting, so a single program can receive funding from both sources.
Yes, so let's.
They can't serve the same individual taking part in that program twice?
That's correct. So let's use rehab, for example.
Yeah.
If we were going to rehab 101 Jones Street, we could use 2 different funding sources to rehab that property. But you couldn't use, it just, first off, it depends on the funding source. So you could use CDBG, for example, to acquire the property. Then you could use ARPA to actually rehab the home, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
But that home could not be served twice. So for example, you couldn't do home and CDBG for the construction of it. They would
Okay.
have to be separate, but you could layer them. I know it's a bit complicated, if that makes sense.
Okay, so in the case of youth development funding, if we're thinking about participants as individuals being served by those programs, how would that work?
I think it would depend on the program.
Right.
So I think that's why the answer was the way it was last time. If you were going to have a summer youth program, you would have to ensure that Nikki, the summer youth child, was served with one pot of money opposed to both pots of money. Because I
Okay.
couldn't receive benefits from both pots of money.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And yes, I think so. And so I imagine that sort of keeping all this straight presents some administrative challenges?
Yes.
Okay, so does that then inform a direction where we could just avoid, if possible, like intermingling those streams and thinking about how we want to allocate funding? I'm not sure, just trying to think through how we, or I guess best understand how you all have discussed this so far.
So I think that's where we were going at the last meeting. You know, commingling funds obviously is a challenge. Administratively, it's easier to ensure that, you know, nonprofit A gets funding from this, and then nonprofit B gets funding from this. If nonprofit A were to get funding sources from both, they would have to be very detailed in who got
Yeah.
funded. So administratively, it's a challenge for the nonprofit as well.
Okay, and so, I'm so sorry for so many
No,
questions,
no,
I
it's
just want to make
important.
sure I understand. So are we in conversation with, or will be in conversation with organization partners about, you know, their capacity to, if awarded from both streams of money, to like manage this in accordance with these regulations?
I think we can certainly have those conversations.
Okay.
And if we were to award a nonprofit two different funding sources, we certainly would sit down and explain to them the challenges of doing it and kind of best practices of managing those things.
But and that would be in the contract. But if there was a mistake made, then ultimately we're responsible for the funding. We would try and seek, the nonprofit to pay that. Of course, you could see where that goes. The other thing I wanted to say was that it's also specific to the fiscal year, we believe. So if you wanted to make that distinction between funding sources per nonprofit, they could receive funding in the next fiscal year from a different federal funding source, which could go to the same beneficiary because it wasn't in the same fiscal year. Is that your understanding, Nikki?
That's correct. And I would also add that, we could, if you have an existing program with one funding source, we could also fund it, but we'd have to add participants. We'd have to increase whatever that program was going to do initially with this funding source. Does that make sense?
A CDBG cohort and an ARPA cohort.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes
Just
sense.
keeping them separate, but you would have to increase what you said you were going to do. You couldn't run the same program. You
Yeah.
have to serve different people.
Gotcha.
So to clarify that one step further, I'm looking here, and Chess and Community have $20,000 in this for Project Rewire that includes STEM and critical thinking for low-income youths. So the Rewire program is the technology program, the robotic one, which isn't the Chess. So they have $20,000 for this. So if they got summer youth program for this, let's say they're doing this in East Athens, but then they opened up a program in West Athens that did the same thing, that would work.
That's right.
And then also the Youth Development Fund for the summer, let's say they have a chess program at 5 locations, which is different from what's here, and that would be fine for the youth development as well.
As long as they're serving different people and one beneficiary doesn't get benefits from both funding sources.
But even if it's like, I'm getting, on Tuesdays, I'm going for robotics, and that's getting paid for by these funds.
That's right.
But then on Thursdays, I'm going to something for chess, and that's getting paid from ARPA funds? Does it have to be, like, I can't go to a program that's getting, like, I can only go to one of the programs, or?
Two different nonprofits, correct?
No, it's all chess and community. Like, because I'm just using this example because of this differentiating here. So if chess and community got money for chess during the summer, right?
Right.
And that program was on Thursdays and Saturdays, and I signed up for that, and that was getting ARPA funds.
Right.
Could I then go to the robotics program on Tuesday that's getting funds from here, that we're talking about tonight?
Yes.
Okay,
Two different programs.
right, but same person in 2 different
Two
programs.
different programs, right.
Okay, got it.
Commissioner Wool had his hand, or their hand.
I think that largely covered it. So same people can be served if it's distinct programming they're being served with. So my last question on this point is timing. can an organization be funding its summer programming through, say, July 1st with CDBG money, and then pick up funding the SAY program on July 2nd with ARPA money?
July 1st and then July 2nd.
Yeah, I'm making those dates up on the fly just to, but, yeah. Like,
Well-
if you use funding from two different sources, from CDBG and ARPA for the same program, but the time it's used for is distinct. So CDBG money is for June and July, and then ARPA money is from August onward.
So theoretically, yes, right, but administratively,
Well, the clearest distinction, I think, would be able to make the second contract effective July the 2nd. There's a clear demarcation between
Yeah.
the start and stop.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's very helpful to understand too.
So it could be teed up, but just not executed, but everybody knows what's about to happen.
That's right.
I did have a question in a different vein on this agenda item, but, I have questions / concerns about the way we choose these partial funding amounts, and if if an organization applies for, say, $40,000 and they're awarded $20,000, but are cut off from seeking other funds that could help make up that gap, how are we ensured that we're funding them at a sufficient amount to still do the program effectively? Is there a way that we can?
Well, I think, being candid, there's only enough money to go around. And, we're trying to help as many as we can. Generally speaking, these funds are gap financing, so, not really trying to fund the whole program, but certainly trying to fund a portion of it to ensure that the nonprofit can do what they need to. That's just generally how it works.
System Manager Jones, I know in the past, sometimes when these questions have come up, what I've heard from past housing community development administrators is that, we effectively wouldn't provide funding if it was going to be a meaningless amount of funds, that we wouldn't fund something so lowly as to make a program ineffective. I mean, is that fair to say?
It is. And, part of the evaluation is that we look at other funding sources coming in and how viable that program is.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking how, a lot of the organizations that we're seeing apply for these two sources we're talking about are organizations that are seeking to expand the number of people they can serve. And so if what we're doing by only partially funding is setting them up to perhaps be capable of continuing to serve the number of people they have been, but not be able to expand, and then that would cut them off from a second funding source, would it make more sense for us to fund fewer organizations at their full amounts, essentially, to allow them to expand? Does that, that gets into more specifics, and I think we have time or capacity to
And to some degree,
discuss
that's a
here, but-
policy question as to how we want to administer the overall program.
And it just depends on the number of applications we get, what those applications are. Year to year, it can change. Some years, there are better applications than others.
Will there be an updated agenda item that can include kind of indicating which recommended organizations have also applied for ARPA money, so we can at least have that?
So like a chart, if you would.
Yeah.
Sure, a table.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
I just wanted to say that this is very complex work, and that I appreciate y'all being very thoughtful, and as well the public for being really patient and trying to, as we all try to figure out how to make this work, because it's an exciting opportunity, but somewhat unprecedented challenges come along with it. So thanks for your good answers.
An unprecedented couple of years. All right, everybody ready to move on? All right, item 8 is the request to approve the Athens Justice and Memory Project Linnentown Walk of Recognition as provided for in the work session last week. Any questions about this? Yeah, Commissioner Parker?
I just wanted to recommend, as I believe kind of came up in passing at our last meeting regarding the role of Dr. Lynn Bussell in the installation of the mosaic, that we have a lot of different kinds of expertise represented on the Justice and Memory team, including that of Dr. Jen Rice, who brings, geographic background and scholarship. And so to have Dr. Bussell appointed to the team might be a way to formalize her involvement in that project without necessarily relying on or being delayed by collaboration with the university.
No, definitely take that into account. I mean, I do understand that we would still have to have a memorandum of understanding regardless, as we move to project delivery, distinct from project conceptualization. But we can definitely continue to talk about what that would look like, because I want to get some clarity from staff kind of following this meeting. Yes, Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, it's laid out that the committee will be involved with the project manager, and the project manager will continue to take some kind of direction from the committee. So I feel like that's a logical way to, streamline the process and assure that Dr. Bussell, who's done really, really important work in engaging the community. I mean, she certainly has the expertise to do that work and is qualified to sit on that committee, and the committee actually, engaged her to help them with their work. So I feel like it's really essential that she be there through to the end alongside the committee as the project manager actually deals with like the nuts and bolts and logistics. Because as I said in the work session, this project is all about rebuilding trust. And Dr. Bussell has been the facilitator to rebuild that trust in engaging the community, and it is essential that that trust be maintained throughout this entire project.
If I might,
Major
Mayor.
Williams.
So I guess this is important to note. So this is an advisory committee with a charge from the mayor. And I think the real point of distinction here is where the volunteers that serve on the advisory committee are giving direction to a third party that's contracted and paid for with government dollars and with assumed liability on behalf of the government. So that simplistically is the issue. I've shared with the chair, Ms. Hattie, that we'll provide in writing several different avenues, but that is the key distinction, I think, and where we're running into some issues with trying to work this out. But we'll work it out. They're just some defined avenues as far as procurement and participation and roles. With the project manager, that would be where the committee would be recommending a concept to you, and perhaps Dr. Bussell advances that to schematic design, and y'all approve that. But at that point, that gets handed over to the project manager to build it. And then, of course, we would have the nuance of working with the committee on how the participatory piece goes. That's kind of different from what we've done before.
Well, from what I understand, the actual built piece, the sculptural gateway piece, part of the concept in installing that piece is for the public and the community to be able to assist in that installation by building the mosaic on the actual piece. And that, I feel, requires that facilitator, that Dr. Bussell, the person who has engaged the community from the beginning in that. I feel like that's where that role is absolutely necessary, in that those final touches on the piece to assure that the community has participated in this up till the very end.
Well, unless, again, with a volunteer, I think they can advise but not direct. I think those are the two verbs that are pretty important when we're dealing with particularly members of the public involved in a project where there could be liability. Somebody has to be accountable for it. And that's, so that there's an issue of the accountability piece, and also how are certain people selected to do certain things. And so the committee can certainly, it's different from the way that we've normally done this with our public art projects. We usually work through the Cultural Affairs Commission, and there's an RFP, and an artist is selected turnkey. And here we've sort of tried to find some balance here by, if the committee wants to voluntarily forward a design concept and perhaps even a schematic design voluntarily, there's no money changing hands, there's no liability with that. And they could certainly, and once you approve it, then that's what we would do. But when you start to move into execution and construction and those types of things, there has to be a contractual relationship between us and the persons doing that work, and then there has to be accountability for the directions to those persons doing that work. And I think that's where the attorney's office landed on one of several avenues, is MOU with the university. If they want to assume the control over that, But if it stays with us, somebody on staff is going to have to be able to hold that contractual entity accountable for receiving our funds and providing liability protection for not only their entity, the public in general, and anybody that participates in the project.
So does our liability, when it comes to officially appointed government committees, does our liability cover those individuals who are members of those committees? Does that, if they are official members of such a committee?
Well-
The liability concerns, I think the manager is talking about is liability concerns related to someone gets hurt out while
at
the
the
project's being
construction.
done or during construction.
Yeah.
Making sure we have the appropriate insurance in place, which is what we do with all of our AgCAC projects. It's in making sure that we get right-of-way easements that are necessary. If we have to get on university property, making sure the thing is built structurally, that's the liability that we're concerned about.
With the actual construction, but as far as like those finishing touches where you have, mosaic pieces being placed on an item that's not necessarily heavy-duty construction.
But it's the same thing. I mean, if somebody
Physical
installs
engagement.
sharp mosaic shards that a child cuts his finger,
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
I'm just wondering if the liability covers the public, because the concept for this is for the public to participate in that process.
And I'm thinking I think there's a way to do that.
Okay.
But that would have to be telegraphed to the entity that's going to sign the contract and be accountable for that liability. So we have to define that process, and that's part of this. So we're going to try and find a way to do this conceptually because that would be an important piece of connecting the community. Don't disagree at all. It's just if certain specific people are going to start directing specific actions of entities that we're under contract for, who we don't have a contract with, that just becomes a little problematic. So I know we're getting down in the weeds here, but, Commissioner Parker alluded to, some of this stuff's complex, and it's better to get it worked out on the front end, and if something happens, then we kind of know where everybody stands.
Commissioner Houle?
Yeah, I guess to kind of narrow down on what I understand to be a couple of the points of contention, albeit in the weeds, there was an email that was forwarded to me from Dr. Rice that I think many in the room, I know staff was sent with a couple of suggestions for language changes, and it was specific to facts and issues, which is not really what we vote on, but it is part of the agenda item. So, I guess my question is, does staff see those two suggestions, which was alterations or additions to section 13C and section 23 of facts and issues, are those things that staff is amenable to adding? Because if
What I've committed to Ms. Hattie is we're going to send clearly defined processes that we can adhere to, in consultation with the attorney, and then we'll work that out with the committee, and if that's what the committee would like to see, because the committee makes a recommendation, not individuals on the committee.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Then we will entertain that, and we will share that back with y'all for your approval.
Okay. Well, I guess to that end, if this could move us forward in a way that helps solve the problem, I know, the especially pertinent section that I think Dr. Rice was referring to, that this discussion has revolved around, is 13C, where it says the RFQ to hire a project manager to oversee and execute the creation of the Walk of Recognition. And she had suggested that the project manager will act at the direction of recommendations made by the Athens Justice and Memory project regarding design and content for the Linnentown mosaic. And in hearing what y'all are saying about the distinction between direction and advisement, I wonder if it could maybe just read, will act under the advisement of recommendations made by that team. But it seems to me from my limited discussions with the folks involved here that something like that captured in writing would maybe formalize enough of a partnership for the people in the Justice and Memory team to feel confident moving forward, and we'd still have that legal distinction between direction and not. I can't speak for them, they're not here. Maybe they're punching the screen at home right now because I wanted to change direction to advisement, but that's, for what it's worth, my 2 cents.
Commissioner Myers?
I'm a little confused, and I'll follow up afterwards when I'm not as confused.
I just want to, go ahead, Commissioner Denson.
Yeah, I don't want us to have to dig all into this during the meeting, so I'll just, and I don't know if this is what you're going to do, Mayor, just ask for some specific questions to be answered to us by email. But I guess the clarification I would like to know is why the MOU has to be done with UGA and not with Dr. Russell personally, if they're going to be able to act in their own capacity. And I guess it's like.
Well, I can speak to that.
Okay, sure.
Because we would normally put out an RFQ or RFP for these artists to come forward to do the project. If we contract directly with her, we're not following the requirements of our procurement process, just like our art project that's on here now. The intergovernmental agreement with UGA or MOU with UGA was suggested as a way that we don't have to do the procurement process because we were a governmental entity. It was a way trying to work around to get what she wanted, which was artistic control. So we only put out RFQs, like where you've got a project, just like on the one we've got on the agenda, where we follow the process. So the MOU with UGA, and that was actually a recommendation I made very early on the first meetings. She came back around to that. I wasn't at the meeting, but Sherry was, and you can watch it on the YouTube. That trying to figure out a way to be proactive in community partnership, but that was the way to possibly do it. And actually, I thought at the point she was open, she suggested a solution, but that may not be no longer a viable thing she wants to do. I don't know.
Okay, so we're dealing with two issues here. One is just trying to work with our procurement policy and make sure we're adhering to it, and the other one is some liability concerns. These things exist. Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted
A big
to say,
legal concern of ours is you're building something the right of way, making sure we have appropriate insurance, someone's responsible for it, someone gets hurt, normal things that we have for all the projects, you know?
and if you had some kind of other questions about those elements, just email those. I mean, I think, what's fair to say, is that everybody goes into this with great spirit and a desire to see a concept executed, and obviously executed well and in a way that's safe, but, in keeping with the vision of the committee. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and sometimes there are legal complexities that are just different than, what may be let's call it a covenantal relationship that may have existed at some point in history, that given that we're a public sector entity and we're talking about use of public right-of-way, it has to be necessarily a little bit different. Commissioner Wool.
On the question of procurement, because I understand the point you're making here, Attorney Drake, could it be another government entity that's not UGA, for example, the Athens Downtown Development Authority?
I guess so, yeah, if they were willing to contract for that responsibility. No, because they're not in that district, you're right.
Okay.
You get out the territory. That wouldn't
But
work.
the kind of overriding point is a public sector entity can enter into an MOU
Yeah.
in a way that a private individual cannot.
Right.
So the other, one of the other development authorities.
All right. All right, number 9 is conversion of public utilities, water utilities software, something that's been long in the works. Any questions about this item?
I suggest we put it on consent.
It looks complete for that to me.
Yeah, I'm glad to see it on
All the
consent. Manager Williams, I know we'd gotten a question via email about the disparity in some of the bid responses. Can you speak just generally to the nature of how software bid responses may vary by, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in cost?
Well, just to clarify too, this is not for the actual software. Okay, so this is for an entity to assist public utilities with procuring the software, as well as, helping, first off, with a needs assessment, creating an RFP that's based on the needs of the PUD, Water Business Office, helping to select the system, helping to negotiate the contract, and that, as important as that is, the real job will be the system implementation. So this group would also be the project manager to help implement it. And I'll just, for the sake of the public's knowledge, so we've had this system at Water Business Office for 32 years. I can tell you that public utilities was much more easier about getting rid of meters altogether and going with a space age cellular system for reporting back meter usage, as opposed to converting from this water billing office, Water Business Office billing software. Over 440,000 bills are generated each year by this, so this is very important. And so this is what, it was competitively bid. We can't control who wants to respond to that. I know that we've seen some, it seemingly folks who have a lot of work might put a big number out there in case they might get it. So it's been bid competitively. It meets all of our procurement standards. This is the low bidder of the two, and they seem to be, the recommendation of the group is to go ahead and proceed with them.
All right, consent, everybody? All right. 10 is relocation of the water and sewer mains at State Route 10 Loop, where the loop and Lexington come together. That realignment is under construction right now, and this is authorization for a standard utility contract item agreement. Yes.
I would like to see that go on consent. It's great that we're getting 160 linear feet of recycled water, the purple line, so to speak. Or is it gray? Which is it, manager?
Purple.
Purple. So that's great that you guys are teaming up with GDOT to have this happening. And I'd like to see it on consent, if anybody else does.
Everybody good with consent? All right. Gene, 10 is on consent as well. All right, moving on to 11. This is another item we saw last week at the work session, project schematics and a binding agreement for expansion of the Athens Neighborhood Health Center's east location. Everybody good with consent there as well? Commissioner Houle?
I'm good with the going to consent. I would just ask if staff can update us in the agenda report that we get on whether they'll incorporate any modifications to the designs with regards to the bathrooms. That was a question I raised up in the work session.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to 12. This is master services and purchasing agreement with Axon for acquisition of on-officer cameras and conducted electrical devices, and this is for the sheriff's office. Questions on this item? Commissioner Houle?
I know Commissioner Myers asked a question by email too. I guess the first question I have is, what's the difference between the Securus contract and this one that drives us to have this one coming before us, but not the Securus one?
You have to talk to the sheriff about that.
Okay. That struck me as odd, I guess, especially given that the Securus one involves generating revenue that we'd receive, whereas this one doesn't even have that component. And maybe the other question is, what are the ramifications of us not approving this? Would it essentially just happen anyway?
Yeah, the specific is happening anyway, that's correct.
So why is it coming before us at all? Like, who
Well, I
put this on
think a
the
lot of
agenda?
times, if you read I think a lot of times we want to encourage our constitutional officers to follow best practices and to go through our procurement process, which this is done, and to go through our process, So I think that's probably maybe why I can't speak for the sheriff, but that may be why. I can tell you, from my prior experience with other governments, it's not unusual for some contracts to go through and some others not to. I know that might be frustrating to you as a commission to say, well, why is that? I think, so I can't speak to that. I do think that's really all I can say to that,
I think another, if I might, Attorney Drake, another distinction is, a pretty substantive capital commitment to this contract as opposed to Securus. So, as has been detailed, the sheriff does have the authority to enter into contracts, but depends on you for the budgetary authority, to fulfill those contracts. And so, this would be, approximately $500,000 a year in capital, which is consistent with what we spend at the police department for such devices. And so, but I agree with Attorney Drake, it was the sheriff's intent to go through this process for this contract approval.
Not on consent.
Okay. All right, item 13 is a congressionally directed spending item from Senator John Ossoff's office for an investigator for LGBTQ+ and elder crimes. Commissioner Denson.
I was just going to say that I really appreciate the police department working with Senator Ossoff's office to to bring this forward. I think it's a position that we need to have here in our county need it for a long time. And so I'm excited to see this kind of collaboration happening. So.
Yep, and Police Department reached out to Senator Ossoff's office, seeing that there was some funding availability, so much credit to them.
And yeah, I would suggest that, that we move it to consent.
Everybody good with consent?
I'm cool with moving it to consent, but I just wanted to bring up that Commissioner Hool and I had a meeting with a coalition of Athens area queer organizations, including Athens Pride, representatives from Boy Bhutan, Athens Queer Collective, who are doing community needs assessments about community needs identified by queer populations. So far, having spoken with BIPOC youth about some of the challenges that they face. And I hope that in moving forward, our commission will also, work with them to invest in things that are identified by these communities as making them safer.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Hool?
Yeah, I agree. Happy with this to go to consent. I do have a question about future budgetary impacts. Do we have a reason to believe that there will be a funding source to fund this position in subsequent years, or is this just to get it off the ground and then this will be a position we're funding in the general fund after that?
Well, the allocation is just for that year, so if you wanted to continue it, it most likely would need to come from the general fund unless we could find another grant source.
I don't
Good
know
question.
if anyone to follow up with that. So congressional appropriations, they have to get them reapproved every year. I'm assuming that Senator Ossoff would not just here's $75,000 and one time, but I don't know how it works, frankly.
Well, if it was approved, that would be the guarantee, and then after that, much like a lot of our state-funded similar positions, we did, if it's not funded, then if you wanted to continue, we'd have to pick it up.
Okay. But
We would hope it would continue.
right, so is it the expectation that Senator Ossoff would continue to submit this for continued congressional funding in future years to support the position?
I don't think we can make that assumption.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, I generally have seen these, there was a lag of more than a decade in congressionally directed spending, and my familiarity prior to that decade lag was mostly that they were one-time capital expenditures, not sort of operating or personnel costs. So that it's a little atypical, sort of given the prior iteration of congressionally directed spending. Commissioner Hool?
So I guess to that point, it'd just be helpful in the staff agenda report if we could get an estimate on future budgetary impact, because this is $75,000 to hire, assign, and train. So what would the year-to-year budget impact be after that? I'm assuming less than that, because we wouldn't be at least training them all over again. So.
Good with consent, though? All right. 14 is another congressionally directed spending item through Senator Ossoff's office, and this is a capital expenditure for police department electric vehicles and charging stations. Yes, Commissioner Link?
With this funding, does that assist us with the, the needs that we identified through SPLOST and our needs for vehicles? Does this help cover that gap that we were looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just make a quick point. Manager Williams, these are just applications, right? We haven't been awarded these grants for these, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Consent on this as well?
What's the award date for these? Did I miss that? When do we expect to hear?
I'm not as familiar with the appropriations process, but I know the federal fiscal year starts October 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so we might not know till the fall if we.
The last round was released in the autumn.
Okay.
All right, consent? All right, 15 just makes certain that the Solid Waste Advisory Commission, that's been a standing body for a long time, is somewhat formalized. That's one of the board authority and commissions sort of under our broader umbrella. So, questions about that?
Consent.
Consent. Right. All right. Yes. Commissioner Rule.
Also happy with it staying on consent, but just curious, we just went through a BACs round, so when do we expect, if we pass this, which I think we will, for the first round to come up? These are 2-year terms, right? from like the existing board into the future board that adheres to this process? Do we have a sense of when people should be on the lookout?
That's a good question. I have not read the charter of the organization yet, but we can find that out and
Okay.
respond via email.
And then I guess the subsequent question I have is how, if at all, it'll be different than our other BACs, because I saw the line about trying to get a representative from each commission district. And so are we looking at trying to recruit or appoint people in a more specialized fashion than we usually do, given that provision?
So I guess, I don't think, we wouldn't assume that the old board would automatically be reappointed. Now, this would be something, it's a new composition of folks. Certainly, if every commissioner is given at least one, depending on where the old board resides, then that commissioner could select that person. Could be all new folks, and the mayor would formally appoint them. And then this is really just a formalization of something that's been a helpful body, but it's not had any real formal structure. And based on the number of topics that you have begun to voice that we really need to pay some attention to, a more formal structure is probably warranted. Staff would recommend.
Yeah, Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor. And so I guess with that, we're thinking that basically a new committee might be appointed. When would this take place? If we immediately after? So the old committee will be dissolved and
Assistant Manager Edwards, Solid Waste is one of his direct reports. He's been working with Director Jansen on this.
I think that would have to be a follow-up, Commissioner Denson. We'd have to look at the calendar and figure out when we could line up an application period and accept applications and then put it on y'all's schedule.
Okay, all right, that's helpful, because my question with that was, I know there is a couple of pretty important topics, the single-use plastic bag ban, a potential or fee, and also the countywide, look at countywide service and how we go about doing that. And so I know, my understanding is this committee's been already dealing on those two topics, and so I guess I would hate to see it have to be started over with a new committee completely starting the whole process of educating those folks over again. I would, I guess, hope to see those things come forward to this body as recommendations before.
Ensure some
completely starting over.
continuity.
Yeah.
So in terms of the first item you brought up, and Commissioner Davenport, please feel free to speak to this if you'd like. Plastic bags, I talked to Suki, Solid Waste Director, Suki Jansen, and they're gathering data on that, but it hasn't been something that they've been able to move forward. So yes, I think the data could be shared with this new committee, and we can hand that off. In terms of the hauler review, that's really why we want to have representation from the entire county, because that impacts every single district in different ways. And so we want to make sure that the body is formed in a representative manner before we move forward with that. So that actually hasn't begun. That work hasn't begun.
Okay. So we feel that both of those topics are at a place where it's okay for the transition.
I think so, but Commissioner Davenport, if you...
Attorney Edwards, you hit the nail on the head. So. And we only meet every quarter, so we have some time if we vote on this to form a new committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Myers.
May I ask if this has been discussed with the present committee, or have they been involved in any discussions on this?
So Solid Waste has been reaching out and sharing this information. This is something that, as we got handed this new charge, there was the realization that we needed a different committee to really tackle this. This is not the first time we've looked at this hauler issue. We want to make sure we're set up to be successful. And so Solid Waste wanted to rethink the makeup of the BAC. They've explained that to the current committee, and many of the members are planning on applying.
Okay.
And I think we'll see many of them on this board, but we just thought it was time to create a formal committee. This is something that's been around since unification and hasn't had a formal charge, and we wanted to formalize it.
No, I just wanted to make sure that they respectfully
Definitely.
have been involved in
Yep,
this.
they have reached out.
Commissioner Hu?
So am I understanding correctly, essentially, we vote to approve this, the next BAC cycle, we go through, kind of like we did with HRC and the Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board, the creation of a whole new committee, and once that happens, we dissolve the existing one, and probably a lot of the people on it have applied to, and perhaps have been appointed to the new one. So, yeah, I guess the only real lingering question for me is just how we're going to approach this geographic question, because that does seem quite distinct from everything else that we do with BACs. And I wonder if it should be less about commission districts and more about whether you're inside or outside the service area of our municipal service. So if it's an 11-person body, that we have 5 or 6 that are inside and then 5 or 6 that are outside, something like that.
Definitely, if you want to spend some time kind of speaking among yourselves as a group, prior to the voting meeting, that might be something to talk about with staff and consider.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would offer that, the solid, whatever the eventual policy is, has the potential of affecting all the residents in some form or fashion, and there was just, seeking some geographic equity and, each district being represented.
Commissioner Davenport, did you want to follow up on that point?
Yeah, so I was planning on a CDO. Sherry Hines is on vacation. So when she gets back in town, we're gonna hash out with Suki some of the issues I have to understand it better. But to me, I think it's equitable and looks good, but I'll look for feedback from my colleagues.
And Mr. Edwards?
Thanks. I've spoken with some employees of the government before who've talked to me about how the number one cause of our stormwater problems and blockages in our stormwater system are single-use plastic bags. So maybe Ms. Jansen could reach out to our stormwater utility, stormwater enterprise folks and get some information about. That's a big concern for me. How much taxpayer dollars are we all spending picking these bags out of our stormwater system? I think that's a cost that we could explore in this discussion. Thanks.
All right. As we know, we annually see a calendar year pavement maintenance program. And I think Manager Williams, you might want to speak to this.
Yes, on the paving. So staff is already in the process of rewriting the agenda item, the recommendation, and the recommendation will be to reject the bids and rebid the project. So on February 1st, you approved the roadway list. We had an available budget of $8.8 million. And then open bids took place 2 weeks ago. 2 qualified bids were received, and both of them exceeded the available paving budget by over $5 million, which is consistent with the pricing that you heard from Athens Housing Authority Director Parker. And so staff met with the attorney's office, and we had discussed whether it was possible to negotiate down the scope. And the attorney's office felt like, no, it's sort of a, the way that the state law is written, and I won't speak for Attorney Drake, but it's sort of a take it or leave it. In this case, we would recommend rebidding it, and we would write a new scope of work where we'd have a base bid and then several bid alternates. The base bid would be basically the rehabilitation resurfacing list minus a few streets, full depth reclamation, which is very expensive, Baxter Street, South Millage, South Rock Springs, and then the bid alternates would be crack sealing, deep patching, crack sealing, and then rehab and resurfacing. And in that way, if we bid it that way, we should be able to, get in the ballpark and then not maybe pursue some of the bid alternates if it's still in excess. If you vote on this rejection of the bid at the May meeting, then we feel like we could turn this bid around to where we could have a notice to proceed perhaps in July, late July or August, and still catch the paving season.
Questions?
And I'll send, the agenda item I will send you an email with that detail plus some, as well as the agenda item will be marked up to reflect that.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I sent out an email earlier today about Fritzmar Lane. And Manager, could you just tell me why Fritzmar, which is an unpaved section of road, it's about 200 feet of unpaved road, and it's a through road connecting Newton Bridge and Cathwood, Why is that not on our list?
Well, there's actually about 10 miles of unpaved road left in Athens-Clarke County. So, you know, we can discuss, there have been some, each one's a little bit different in that case, and we've gone back and forth on some ownership issues, which we think are resolved with Fritz Marr now. And we can do that. And, you know, these other dirt roads, you want to decide whether or not you want to try and deal with those as well. It'll just come at the expense of some existing paved road maintenance.
Well, my concern is Fritz Marr's seen a lot of development in recent years, and from what I understand, it was, you know, the Oaks, which is the assisted living and care home on that road, it underwent several phases, and it's finally complete. The Town Square subdivision was incomplete up until the last couple years, and that subdivision is now complete. So apparently Fritz Marr Road is now the main entrance for everybody living in that community. And you also have some industrial development. You have the Kinder Core vinyl factory, which is at the other end. So it's become a really busy through road. You have school buses going through there, trucks with lots of deliveries, even though there's a no truck sign. And apparently it's getting a little dangerous, and you know, it's kicking up dust. And I'm just wondering what we need to do to get that road on the list. And with the new Publix coming in on that end of Jefferson Road, I feel like it's only going to get even busier.
Well, with regards to the current cycle, you know, that could be added through a CDO when you go, you know, you could amend the list, or, you know, in this ensuing year, staff could come back with sort of a, you know, some type of assessment of the various dirt roads that we have left remaining, and some prioritized list with some cost estimates, and then you could, you know, we could discuss those criteria.
Are any of those other roads actual through roads between, like, main collector corridors?
I'm not sure, but I can provide y'all a map that shows the location of those roads.
Yeah, I mean, if you could share that map, and I might want to put up a CDO to at least get Fritz Marr on that list, because it's only about 200 feet of road, and it is a main entrance for a fairly large neighborhood and industrial area, and assisted living and care home that sees a lot of traffic.
And for folks who weren't around, the paving of that dirt road was poised to happen with the second phase of the Oaks, which has yet to actually emerge. So that was part of the zoning approval there, is that they would pave that when the next phase happened. And obviously the next phase has just never happened. But certainly that increase in use that you referenced, you know, we can all see. My sister lives in the Town Square neighborhood, so I see it all the time.
I'm hearing from new Town Square residents in those brand-new homes there, and yeah, they're concerned.
All right.
Mayor, I have a
yes.
question for staff. Manager Williams, if we move forward with that and have that altered scope created, will that come back before this body, before that moves forward?
So the way this would look, if you vote to reject the bids, then you will have another opportunity to vote on, hopefully, a bid that fits the budget. And at that point, you could introduce a CDO for a different road segment.
Okay, I just wanted, because you said that some of the roads that are currently on the list that we voted on already would possibly be taken off.
Yes,
And
sorry.
so I would like
Yes.
to, definitely want to see some of those roads that are on there, want to make sure some aren't going to be taken off. So I'd
Right.
just like to be able to look at that list before that move forward.
I appreciate your question. So yes, the time to do that would not be at the May voting meeting, because that would,
Correct.
well,
Yes, it would.
yes, it would,
would.
Actually,
actually.
get out the roads we want to do,
Because those,
as to what the paving.
because the unit cost is what we'd want to understand. So I'm sorry. Thank you, Attorney Drake. We would want to know that at the May meeting. What roads are in, what roads are out.
Okay. So will you be presenting that alternate list to us via email or?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is, of course, the coming youth development summer funding recommendations, which staff will be working on in the next couple of weeks. And then 18 is a resolution that really is in line with our energy goals regarding climate change. Yes, Commissioner
That's where
Parker.
this came from?
Yes, advocacy group that's connected with the 100% Athens cluster brought that forward.
I can speak to that a little bit. This is the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy is trying to do some advocating for it and has been reaching out to local governments in Georgia to get resolutions like this passed so that they can use it in awareness that the kind of work that really needs to be done, we can do our work locally, but we need things need to be going on the federal level as well. And so there was a request for going out to city governments and county governments for a resolution on this line so they could use it in their advocating for Georgia at the federal level. And I did want to make sure, and it aligns like exactly with our 100% resolution, and calls on the Congress to address climate change in 2020 by passing federal legislation that meets the scale of the crisis, investing $550 billion in the clean energy transition, helping save American families money while growing the clean energy economy, and cultivating justice through the Justice 40 commitment. And I did clarification on that. That is actually a White House federal Justice 40 commitment to allocating 40% of the investments to disadvantaged government communities. So again, that lines up just exactly with our resolution here that was voted on in 2019, I believe. Does that help?
Yeah, and then the second question, do these actions, not a climate scientist, put us, if taken, put us on track to keep warming below 1.5 degrees?
On the federal level?
Yeah.
Oh. You mean that amount of money?
Yeah.
Is that all the money that's, I do not know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Is the $500 billion what it would take?
And, these other actions like cutting emissions by 50 to 52%, et cetera, as someone that is not well versed in these issues. I just like to, understand if what we're calling for is actually meeting the goals that we're also setting out with regards to preventing climate.
Yeah, I'll look into those things more and on the wording, because there were a couple of changes in the wording that I might suggest, just very small changes.
Just curious,
as
thank
well.
you.
Commissioner Denson?
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I believe that there is an important error that should be fixed on the last whereas. It says ACCUG is committed to achieving a just and equitable transition to 100% clean and renewable energy for ACCUG by 2035 and the community as a whole by 2030.
Oh, yeah, that's
I
a
believe it's
typo.
supposed to be 2050.
Yes, that's a typo.
Yeah,
And I also wanted to move that up further as well.
Okay. So we'll have that addressed. Okay, thank you.
Minor edits there. All right.
Thank you that would be good, though, 2030. Okay.
All right, I believe we have two planning and zoning items, so I'm going to relinquish my seat so that the screen can come down.
Need some sodium?
Oh, they have it right after the 20. I saw the. Did you call it? No, but I feel guilty. I didn't.
Maybe it was just switching over from having that on the other monitor earlier.
There's only one six-pack too.
Clearly, I was not the only one who could accept.
All right. All right, we're cooking with gas. We've got two planning and zoning items. First one of these is on Highway 29 at the Athens Christian School. Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you, Mayor. First item is 1270 Highway 29 North, currently a special use in the RS-15 and commercial rural zoning districts. And this is the Athens Christian School requesting to rezone their property to commercial general. As I mentioned, it is currently a special use. Current future land use is general business, of which neither RS-15 or commercial rural are currently compatible. So what they're asking to change from a zoning standpoint is bring it into compliance with the future land use map. 60 acres, CG zoning permits school uses, allows for future improvements, and I think that's what the school is really looking for here. Over the years, because it's special use with a binding plan, anytime they have brought forward a proposed change to an athletic field or a new facility of any type, they've had to come back through the special use process to amend their plan. The CG would allow those things to be dealt with administratively under the CG standards, but recognizing, let me not get too far ahead here, you see the property here on the eastern side of 29. Future land use, current zoning on the left, zoning proposed on the right, which would make it compatible. As mentioned, what Athens Christian is really wanting to do here is to get out from under the need to bring this back through for finding consideration every time, but recognizing concerns of what just a straight commercial general designation could allow for down the road, and the fact that there are existing residential property that have been there for a long time and family property immediately north of this site and then around on the eastern side. They are certainly willing to commit to a condition that restricts the use of this property to a school or educational use only. So it would become CG, would make changes administrative, but would not allow for them, for example, to sell the property for a shopping center without the new owner having to come back through, amend the zoning to allow that use, which would give you all an opportunity to review any proposed changes down the road. That was the concern of the Planning Commission, was that unlimited list of uses. The church certainly agreed with it, and so the Planning Commission's recommending approval with that to be added as a condition. And I think we do have Dr. Cummings here. I don't know if he's planning on speaking, but he is in the audience, so.
All right. It's in Commissioner Thornton's district.
I definitely support this. And I do like the fact that we're looking at the future land use as that whole area is really growing. I guess my only question, and maybe not about this area, no, it's not about this area, but yeah, I do support this, and to be prepared for the future land use plan. I think this is timely.
Any other questions? Commissioner Lee?
Yeah, I share the Planning Commission's concerns. This is a huge chunk of property, and if the whole property were to be converted to CG down the line, I feel like it could have some detrimental impacts to the adjacent RS, and also it would be a loss of valuable RS land. We really have a need for more single-family housing. And especially with this area developing, with the Space Kroger right down the street, it's actually accessible to services and jobs. But that said, with the restriction on just the school use, I'm a little more comfortable with it. I'm just concerned that, if, 20 years from now, the property were to flip, what are the chances of it getting zoned back to RS? I mean, I guess we don't know because it's 20 years down the line. But you don't often see that, you know? You don't often see a down zone from commercial to residential. That's very rare. I mean, you do see residential to commercial. So I just have some trepidation about it, considering the need in this community for single-family housing. And is this on the sewer line?
Yes.
Okay.
It goes across the back of this. And
So Brad, I guess the short answer is that, any modification in use, either under the CG dynamic or modification in zoning, of course, would return to this body.
anything other than, if at some point it became desirable for Athens Christian to move, they could sell it to another church, another school, and it could continue to be used there, but any other use would have to return to the seated commission at the time that occurs for a modification, just like a PD would have to. With the current future land use map not being compatible with that RS-15 zoning. I mean, we've got the commercial up the corridor on that side. It would require long-term, because it's not compatible right now with future land use.
It's directly adjacent to AR land. I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to put a condition on saying that if the property were to change hands and come back for a different use, if it could automatically convert back to RS. Is that?
I don't think you've got the ability to bind a
No.
future commission to any action, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any material concerns about the item itself. It did strike me as odd that it passed with 5 votes because half of the planning commission wasn't at the meeting, I guess.
Spring break.
Spring break. Okay, I was like, what's going on here? And so the lack of full input from the body is unusual and sort of weakens my confidence somewhat. But otherwise, I don't really have any substantive concerns at this time.
Denson?
Thank you, Mayor. Brad, I wonder, because I know one of the things also discussed was a possible buffer condition, and that there is, like you said, on that north side and in the AR zone, there are some homes pretty close there to the. What would be, and I saw that, correct, they're moving forward, the recommendation was not to have a buffer zone, right? That was not part of the condition. So what would be the, if we were to do this, what would be the required buffer that would need to be there, if any? Is there, if we went to CG?
Let me get to where we are here. See if I can get the arrow up here. So along this northern edge, and this is where the exit driveway comes out. From about this point back, you're going to have more than enough natural buffer to meet a 50-foot requirement. There's a small area within here that, they may be required to put up a fence and some landscaping on both sides of it to meet that. Okay. The interesting thing about the meeting as it relates to the neighbors that attended, and there was a group of those owners immediately to the north.
Right.
They had concerns that this impacted their property as well, that a rezoning of this would also rezone their property, and they were assured that that would not happen. They also had concerns with valuations of their property, as well as, the biggest thing was how it impacted their property. If their property also became CG and something happened to a house, would they be allowed to rebuild? And when they were given the assurance that it only impacted the school, and then especially when Dr. Cummings offered the condition that the only use could be a school, they seemed to have no further issues with the request at that point.
Okay. Thank you.
No, that kind of answered my question. I heard listen to some of those residents, and that's very helpful. Now I can see where they lived. But they did reiterate that they had positive interactions with the school and that had never been an issue. And so with this condition being on it, they seem content with that. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yeah, and even the early discussion with the buffer that was kind of tossed around a little bit was really intended, it was a larger buffer, but it was intended to be implemented at the time of redevelopment of the property. So you've kind of taken that off the table by not allowing any redevelopment of the property except for expansion of the school without it coming back.
Yeah, Commissioner Davenport?
Just one question. So ACC water and sanitary sewer are available. So is the school currently on sewer lines, or they can tie into it?
You may have to ask Dr. Cummings that. I'm not sure if they've formally tied in or not.
Yeah, we have formally tied in. When the Trail Creek line came out, it's right on the back of our property. It was very beneficial for us to tie into that, so we did that, 3, 4, 5 years ago, whenever that was extended out there.
It's right here, Commissioner, I believe, and then it comes on up and that clearing right up through there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoop?
I just want to be clear on this. You said that it would be restricted to the school. It's restricted to the use as a school.
As a
So
school.
theoretically, another school could move in.
Another
but
school
only
could,
if it's a school.
yes. Mhm.
All right. One more
Okay.
item.
Okay, next item is 2100 Barnett Shoals Road. This is an amendment to an existing commercial general plan development. This is Zaxby's on Barnett Shoals Road. Currently, it's a commercial neighborhood PD that was approved earlier for reconstruction of the restaurant, but I don't believe that ever occurred. General business, future land use. Actually, what they're proposing is a smaller building, less parking, some modifications you see listed there. Here is the property out in front of Kroger and formerly what was Kmart. Future or existing zoning with the PD. This is the site plan that, as proposed, I think this may be one of the last remaining Zaxby's that was the original grouping that tended to go into old Long John Silver's, and this is still one of the old buildings. And so they're wanting to upgrade and go to a newer model that is actually smaller. It's a little more efficient with the drive-through system and includes less parking. Elevations. Planning Commission recommendation, they certainly did not have an issue with the proposed change. There were some conditions that staff had recommended. You see conditions 1 and 2 have been addressed and would no longer appear on your ordinance. But we are asking for your consideration for condition 3. This was a staff-initiated condition, and if I can go back, the rear of this property ultimately is the location of the completion of the access road that goes from Barnett Shoals to College Station. And although it has not been built yet, there's no parking back here. PD makes it a binding plan. We would really like to add a condition here that would allow, if and when that road goes in, it would allow Zaxby's to connect to it without having to go back through this process to amend the plan. So if we add that as a condition, that would give us that administrative ability to allow that change. So we're asking for your consideration for that condition, but other than that, the Planning Commission recommendation was to approve.
Commissioner Myers, in District 8?
Yeah, my first planning item, all these months and months. Yeah, and I listened to this, it makes sense. You know, probably people on that side of town will be thrilled just because it's something new, even though it's the same restaurant. I do have one question, as much for my education as anything else in here. This is going to be they're knocking down the old building, putting up a new thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
On a piece of property like this fast food restaurant, what are the requirements in terms of vegetation, trees and such? Is there anything? Do they have to put any trees in there?
Yes, there will be trees planted along the perimeters as well as within the parking lot and across the back. So there are landscaping requirements that would be required to be met.
Okay, I'm fine.
Commissioner Edwards?
How come we don't require them to connect into that shopping center right now?
I'm not sure what existing conditions is, but there may be parking spaces right there, immediate.
Okay.
Mark Campbell's with us here this evening with Carter Engineering. He may be able to tell you, but it looks like from kind of the halftone on the top of that drawing that those are 90-degree pull-in parking spaces right now for what would be Kmart. And then the driveway is on beyond that,
Okay.
up here.
So it would have to be just in an agreement with the folks from the shopping center that they would be able to.
Yeah, I mean,
have that
the
ingress.
long-term plan for this road is similar to it, the way it runs through the Publix component to the north, would be to hug this property line as it came along through here, and it would be public easement, private property is the way we set up the balance of it, which would then give them the ability to tie into it.
I just don't, I always see this when, developments go into a large parcel like this and they're all walled off, and you can't get connected to the other portions of the development. It's just, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Commissioner Link and then back to Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, I remember when the Kmart redevelopment came through, which I understand is on hold or being reconfigured, and I remember there being some conflict with the fact that there are these out parcels that are walled off. So I'm glad to know that staff has recommended, asking for that condition that will connect it when that redevelopment happens. Because right now, Commissioner Edwards is correct, it is completely walled off, and there is parking that is walling it off. There's parking on the Kmart side that's walling it off. So the vision for that entire sea of concrete and vacant building is for there to be that connectivity and for that access road to run through the entire project that will connect those out parcels.
Yes. Basically continuing the design that runs through between Chick-fil-A and Publix in that same area right now.
There is a vision to fix
Yes.
this.
Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, back to me, I guess, on this thing. Following up on what Commissioner Edwards brought up, the idea is that there's parking spaces there now, but in the future, when there's this road, they would put it in. Could you explain that again to me? Because, to be honest, that's an empty space, but people are using it as that road all the time. So if there are people going through there constantly, because I do it, everyone else does it, as a way to get from Kroger's over to Publix, to Jittery Joe's, to all the things over there. Why isn't there an entrance in there now, so that all those people who are coming from, like Publix area, if they were gonna use this, they'd have to go out at the light, come in, I'm just curious on that.
I would assume that the answer to that is you're dealing with two private property owners, that we don't really have the ability to compel them to connect to each other. The PD kind of created that ability through, that road with the public easement on it and the connections was part of the PD, of which has never been built.
Right.
But, it is still in the long-term plans to get it built and completed to College Station.
Yeah, no, I'm just like, as someone who's building that, I would think that you'd want people to come in that way right now, because people are in there, but maybe I could ask a developer that, or here, they could reach out to me to explain that.
All right.
Okay.
All right, that is it for this evening. Attorney Drake, did you want to formalize this with a motion to adjourn? All right, we have a motion to adjourn from the floor.
So moved. Second.
Got a motion from Commissioner Thornton, second from Commissioner Edwards. All in favor?
Yeah.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned.